What if I told you that one of the most shocking territorial moves in modern history might be unfolding right now? Not through war, not through invasion, but through boardrooms, global summits, and private diplomatic messages. What if I told you that Greenland, a massive, frozen island most people barely think about, has suddenly become the center of a geopolitical earthquake, powerful enough to shake NATO, rattle Europe, and redefine America's place in the world? And what if I told you that Donald Trump is once again at the center of it all? Tonight's story is not just about Greenland. It's not just about Trump. It's about power, legacy, fear, and a world order that suddenly feels far more fragile than anyone wants to admit. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why leaders across Europe are panicking, why NATO is quietly bracing for chaos, and why this moment could change global politics for decades. Breaking summary. What just happened on January 21st, 2026, as snow fell over the Swiss Alps and the world's elite gathered at the World Economic Forum in Davos? One man hijacked the entire conversation. U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in Switzerland with one explosive message. He is more determined than ever to acquire Greenland. Not negotiate politely, not slowly explore options, but actively push toward a deal, or something far more aggressive. He openly confirmed that he would hold meetings about Greenland in Davos. He framed the island as a national security necessity. He warned that NATO should be very happy with what he's planning. And behind the scenes, his administration launched a verbal assault on Denmark, the country that technically governs Greenland. NATO leaders are now warning that Trump's Greenland strategy could tear the alliance apart. European leaders are scrambling. France is calling for NATO military exercises in Greenland. Denmark is reportedly considering sending up to 1,000 troops there. And Trump? He's not backing down. In fact, he's escalating. Background: why Greenland matters. To understand why this is so dangerous, you first need to understand Greenland. Greenland isn't just ice and polar bears. It's the largest island on Earth. It sits between North America and Europe. It controls critical Arctic sea routes. It's rich in rare earth minerals. And it hosts a major U.S. military base at Thule. In a warming world, Greenland's strategic value is exploding. As Arctic ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening. As technology races forward, rare minerals buried under Greenland's ice are becoming priceless. And as tensions rise with Russia and China, the Arctic is becoming the next great battlefield of influence. For decades, the U.S. has quietly maintained military and intelligence assets in Greenland. But Trump doesn't want quiet influence. He wants ownership. Timeline. How we got here. This didn't start in Davos. Trump first floated the idea of buying Greenland years ago and was widely mocked. But something changed after he returned to office. According to sources familiar with his thinking, Trump became obsessed with legacy. He wanted something historic, something territorial, something that would place his name next to Alaska and Hawaii. Those were the last two major territorial expansions of the United States. In 1959, Trump reportedly told advisors that adding Greenland would make him the most consequential president for American territory in over a century. Then came the global chaos. Trump orchestrated the ousting of Venezuela's president, seized control of that country's oil, threatened action against Cuba, Colombia, and Iran, and openly talked about redrawing geopolitical lines. And then, Greenland returned to the center of his world. In January 2026, Trump confirmed publicly that he was actively discussing Greenland. Then he dropped the real bombshell. We need it for national security. What Trump is really saying, this is where the story gets chilling. Trump isn't pretending this is about diplomacy or partnership. He's framing Greenland as a military necessity, an Arctic guard post against Russia and China, a strategic asset that the U.S. must control. He even refused to rule out the use of military force. Let that sink in. A sitting U.S. president openly declining to rule out using the military to seize territory from a NATO ally. That alone is unprecedented in modern history. And when asked how far he was willing to go, Trump smirked and said, "You'll find out." Europe reacts. Panic behind closed doors. European leaders are not laughing. They are terrified. NATO officials are warning that Trump's Greenland push could upend the alliance. Denmark is furious. Greenland's own leaders are alarmed. France is demanding NATO exercises in Greenland. Copenhagen is reportedly preparing to deploy troops. And privately, European diplomats are saying something shocking. They no longer trust the United States. This is the deepest fracture in transatlantic relations in decades. The Besant incident, diplomacy collapses, then things got uglier. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent publicly called Denmark irrelevant. Not in private, not off the record, on the world stage. He mocked Denmark's investments, dismissed its economic influence, and implied that European investors don't matter. This wasn't just rude. It was a diplomatic nuclear bomb. European officials were stunned. And suddenly, this wasn't just about Greenland anymore. It became about humiliation, power, and America asserting dominance over its allies. NATO's awkward silence. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte tried to calm things down. He admitted the Arctic must be protected. He acknowledged concerns about Russia and China, but he refused to comment on Trump's threats. That silence speaks volumes. Behind the scenes, NATO officials are reportedly in crisis meetings. They are asking a question no one ever expected to ask. What if the United States becomes the threat? The Russia-China question, here's the twist. There is little evidence that Russian or Chinese ships are actively threatening Greenland. Russia says the threat is a myth. China denies aggressive Arctic ambitions. And independent analysts say Trump's security justification is wildly exaggerated, which raises a terrifying possibility. Is this about security? Or is this about ego, legacy, and raw power? The Macron message, diplomacy shattered. Then came the Macron moment. French President Emmanuel Macron privately messaged Trump urging him to attend a G7 meeting. Trump leaked the message. Publicly, he dismissed Macron's concerns, mocked him, and revealed that Macron wrote, "I do not understand what you are doing on Greenland." This was a stunning breach of diplomatic protocol. It sent a clear message to the world. Trump does not care about alliances anymore. The Davos disguise. What else is Trump doing? Officially, Trump says he came to Davos to talk about the U.S. economy, to unveil a housing plan, to promote 401k down payments, to boast about economic growth. But no one is paying attention. Greenland has swallowed everything. Even his Gaza Board of Peace ceremony. Even his meetings with Poland, Switzerland, and Egypt. Everything is now overshadowed by one question. Is Trump about to break the world order? Hidden angle. The legacy obsession. This is the part no one wants to say out loud. Trump is obsessed with being remembered. He doesn't want to be another president. He wants to be historic. Territorial expansion gives him that. Greenland gives him that. And if diplomacy fails, force still gives him that. Why this matters to you? You might be thinking, why should I care about Greenland? Because this isn't about Greenland. It's about whether powerful nations can start grabbing territory again. It's about whether alliances still mean anything. It's about whether international law still exists. If Trump succeeds here, every border on Earth becomes negotiable again. What could happen next? 3 paths now exist. 1. A quiet deal is struck. America gains control through money and pressure. 2. NATO collapses into internal war. Europe militarizes Greenland. America retaliates economically. 3. A military standoff in the Arctic. All 3 are catastrophic. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This is happening right now. A U.S. president is openly threatening to take territory from a NATO ally. Europe is mobilizing. NATO is fracturing. And the Arctic is becoming the next front line of global conflict. So the real question is no longer, will Trump take Greenland? The real question is, what happens to the world if he tries? And what happens to all of us if no one stops him? Because history is moving fast now, and the next chapter might already be writing itself. And just when the world thought this Greenland crisis couldn't get any stranger, new layers began emerging beneath the surface. Layers that suggest this is not a sudden obsession, not a spontaneous policy idea, but a carefully building storm that may have been forming inside Trump's inner circle for years. Because behind closed doors, this Greenland push has been quietly mapped out far longer than anyone realized. Silent preparations. What was happening in the shadows? According to multiple diplomatic and intelligence sources now speaking off the record, Trump's administration began reviewing Greenland's strategic and legal status months ago. Teams inside the Pentagon were reportedly asked to prepare classified briefings on Greenland's airspace, naval access routes, satellite coverage, mineral deposits, undersea cable networks, and military response scenarios at the same time. U.S. diplomats in Copenhagen and Nuuk were instructed to quietly assess political fault lines inside Denmark and Greenland's semi-autonomous government. Who might be persuadable? Who might resist? Who might break ranks under pressure? This wasn't casual curiosity. This looked like groundwork. And that's what's now sending chills through European capitals. Because it means Davos wasn't the beginning. It was the public launch. Greenland's own fears. A voice in '01 is hearing. Lost in all this great power drama is the voice of Greenland's own people. 57,000 residents. An indigenous culture. A fragile economy. A population that never asked to become the prize in a global power struggle. Greenland's leaders have repeatedly said one thing, clearly and calmly. We are not for sale. They've offered expanded U.S. military access, joint economic projects, security cooperation. But ownership? Sovereignty transfer? That is a hard no. And yet now, many Greenlanders are quietly preparing for the worst. Local media reports describe growing anxiety. Parents asking whether schools would be disrupted. Fishermen wondering whether shipping lanes will be militarized. Young people asking whether they'll be forced to carry American passports one day. For them, this isn't strategy. It's their future being negotiated without their consent. Denmark's dilemma, trapped between allies and humiliation. Denmark now finds itself in an impossible position. Say yes to Trump and surrender sovereignty. Say no and face trade wars, financial retaliation, and possible military escalation. And this is where the situation becomes truly dangerous. Because Denmark is not just another small country. It's a founding NATO member, which means any military action against its territory triggers NATO's collective defense clause. That clause obligates all members, including the United States itself, to respond. In other words, if America attacks Greenland, America technically attacks NATO. That is how absurd this situation has become. European legal scholars are now openly debating scenarios that were once unthinkable. Could NATO split in two? Could Europe form a new military alliance without the US? Could Article 5 collapse forever? These conversations are no longer academic. They are happening in real time. The economic war nobody is talking about, while the military threat gets headlines. An economic war is quietly forming underneath. Trump has already threatened tariffs against European countries that oppose him. His Treasury Secretary just insulted Denmark publicly. And now financial analysts are warning of something far more destabilizing. European pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, central banks. These institutions hold massive amounts of U.S. Treasury bonds. If even a small portion of those holdings are dumped, U.S. borrowing costs spike, the dollar weakens, global markets wobble, and suddenly this isn't just a Greenland story anymore. It becomes a global financial shock, one that hits ordinary people. Mortgages, retirement savings, stock markets, all collateral damage in a geopolitical ego war. The Russian and Chinese reaction, waiting in the wings. Now here's the truly terrifying part. Russia and China are watching all of this silently, and they are loving it. Because every crack inside NATO, every insult between allies, every threat Trump makes weakens the Western alliance structure they've spent decades trying to break. Russian state media has already begun mocking NATO's unity. Chinese commentators are calling the situation proof that the U.S. is an unreliable partner. And intelligence officials now warn that both Moscow and Beijing may exploit the chaos. More Arctic patrols, more investments in polar infrastructure, more political pressure campaigns. In other words, Trump's Greenland obsession may end up accelerating the very Russian and Chinese influence he claims to fear. The Nobel Prize grievance. Yes, this is real. And then there's the detail that sounds absurd, but is completely real. Trump has privately linked Greenland to his anger over not receiving a Nobel Peace Prize. Sources close to him say he believes a major territorial deal would force the Nobel Committee to recognize him. Let that sink in. The fate of an entire territory, the stability of NATO, the peace of the Arctic, possibly being influenced by a personal grudge. This is the kind of revelation that makes even seasoned diplomats uneasy, because it means rational cost-benefit logic may no longer apply. The Gaza parallel, a pattern emerging. Remember Trump's new Board of Peace for Gaza? Remember how he sidelined the United Nations? Remember how he hinted that the US could take over peace negotiations permanently? Seen in isolation, that looked like ambition. Seen together with Greenland, it looks like something else. A pattern. A president positioning the United States as the ultimate global authority. Over territory, over conflict resolution, over borders, over diplomacy itself. And once a leader starts believing he personally decides the world's map, history tells us what usually comes next. What his advisors are really saying: publicly, Trump's inner circle supports him. Privately, it's chaos. Several senior defense officials are reportedly urging restraint. State Department veterans are warning of irreversible alliance damage. Intelligence analysts are cautioning that Greenland offers limited real security benefit compared to the diplomatic cost. But Trump is not listening. Sources describe him as locked in, as personally invested, as emotionally committed to the Greenland idea, which is exactly what scares everyone the most. The media war, information as a weapon, now something else, is unfolding quietly. A propaganda battle. Pro-Trump media outlets have begun pushing narratives that Greenlanders secretly want US-controlled Denmark, is exploiting Greenland China, is building secret bases nearby Russia, is planning Arctic invasions. None of this is supported by evidence. But repetition creates belief, and belief creates public permission. Permission for drastic action. This is textbook narrative conditioning. And intelligence agencies are now tracking coordinated online campaigns amplifying these claims. The question is, who is feeding them, and why now? The moment that could trigger everything. Here is the nightmare scenario diplomats are now whispering about. A staged incident, an accident near Greenland's coast, a mysterious drone intrusion, a cyber attack blamed on Russia or China, a protest turned violent. Any spark, any excuse. Because once a crisis atmosphere exists, Trump can invoke emergency powers, deploy troops for protection, establish a permanent US security zone. And from there, ownership becomes a formality. This is exactly how territorial grabs have happened throughout history. Not with one big invasion, but with temporary security measures that never end. Why this feels different from everything before. Here's what separates this moment from every previous geopolitical crisis. Usually, leaders pretend. They hide intentions. They deny ambitions. Trump isn't hiding anything. He is saying it out loud. He wants Greenland. He is willing to threaten allies. He is willing to use force. He is willing to fracture NATO. And he is willing to gamble global stability for personal legacy. That level of transparency is not comforting. It's terrifying, because it means this train is not slowing down. It's accelerating. What Europe is secretly preparing for. European defense ministries are now gaming out extreme scenarios. Not publicly, not officially, but internally. What if US forces move into Greenland without permission? What if Denmark invokes NATO's defense clause? What if some NATO members refuse to respond? What if Europe has to militarily resist the United States? These are not theoretical war games anymore. They are contingency planning sessions. And that alone tells you how serious this has become. The point of NO return: every crisis has a moment. A single decision, a single statement, a single action, after which everything changes. Diplomats fear that moment is approaching fast. One aggressive speech, one leaked intelligence report, one naval deployment, one tariff order, and suddenly this stops being diplomacy and becomes history. Final emotional build-up. So let's step back for one quiet moment and really absorb what's happening. A US president is trying to take land from a NATO ally. Europe is mobilizing troops. NATO is fracturing. Russia and China are watching and waiting. Markets are trembling. And Greenland's people are trapped in the middle. This is not normal. This is not safe. This is not sustainable. And yet, it is unfolding right now, in real time, with no clear off-ramp. History doesn't always announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through press conferences, through leaked messages, through tense summits in snowy mountains. And years later, people look back and say, that was the moment everything changed. We may be living inside that moment right now. And the scariest part? No one seems to be in control anymore. Not Europe, not NATO, not even Trump himself. Because once legacy, ego, fear, and power collide, events take on a life of their own. So the next time you hear the word Greenland, don't think of ice. Don't think of maps. Don't think of politics. Think of this. The future of the world order may now depend on a frozen island and one man's obsession with owning it. And whatever happens next, none of us will be able to say, we didn't see it coming.